Alright, so ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be the first of five presentations on Chapter 5, which is on Greece. The first one we're going to be taking a look at is going to be the early people of the Aegean. This corresponds with section 5.1 of your textbook. So let's go ahead and get started. Really, if we're going to take a look at some of the initial Greek mythology, we're not going to be taking a look at a lot of it because we, quite frankly, don't have time, and most of it can be looked up. You're going to cover some of it in your literature class through English, but what I do want to point out is going to be the myth of Europa, because it does show a connection to the Phoenicians, which we studied in Chapter 2. As the legend goes, there was a Phoenician princess hanging down by the side of the Mediterranean Sea, and she was gathering flowers when she noticed a bull that was actually sauntering along the beach line. And when she approached him to put one of these crowns of flowers that she had made around his horn, he instantly transported her on his back, jumping across the Mediterranean Sea and landing on the Isle of Crete, which is pictured here, which is in the Aegean Sea in the Mediterranean. I'll go forward to a map so you can see exactly where it's located, and then we'll come back here. Okay, so you can see here, here's the Isle of Crete. She would have jumped from down over this direction, landed here in the Isle of Crete. So that is where we actually get the term for one of the 7 continents, obviously, which is Europe. Hopefully you're able to see the connection there. Alright, so we're talking about the Isle of Crete. The isle is not terribly large. It's only maybe, I think it's 180 or 200 miles wide, and about a quarter, again, is wide at its widest point. One of the sites we're going to be the most concerned with here is the Knossos, which is located right here, which is going to be an ancient palace site. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later. The Minoans, as you can see here, the word Minoans is the earliest people really studying here. They get their name from the legendary king Minos. And Minos is kind of like King Arthur when we talk about England. He wasn't exactly a 100% legitimate historical figure. There are legends that he was maybe half mortal, half immortal, kind of like Hercules was. So, but he is the legendary founder and the legendary king of the Minoans. It's where they draw their name from. These guys are going to be at the height of their power between the mid-18th and the end of the 16th century BC. And these people were primarily traders. They were not a warrior people. The palace at Knossos is one of the best sites we have for studying them. This is an artist depiction. If you look here, this is an artist depiction of what they believe it might have looked like. And this is a modern-day picture of the ruins. There's still a lot of ruins that you can actually go see. And if I believe, and I'm not 100% certain, but I believe this photo taken right here is actually taken from this side. And if you would look from this direction at this is probably what you'd be able to see. All right. It was a very vast palace, and throughout it had both shrines and frescoes. These are 2 important words you need to be familiar with. A shrine is going to be a very small area that's normally located to the worship of a god or a deity in a small spot. It could be a small statue, it could be a small fountain, it could be just a corner of a room that's set aside for worshiping this particular group of people, this particular god. Frescoes, there's actually a fresco pictured here, and we're going to take a look at more at frescoes when we talk about the Renaissance. The fresco is a type of interesting painting whereby you take wet plaster. You see, it's like the stuff that you would have on your house. Normally, on your drywall inside your rooms, you've got that stuff kind of looks like orange peel down in Florida. What they really have is they take that stuff when it's wet, or something that's similar to that, and they put it on a wall. And then while it's still wet, they take watercolor and they paint directly on the wet plaster, and it creates an effect right here. And you can see, I mean, this is a painting that's quite old. You know, it's 4,000 years old, and yet it stands up, and it's partly because the paint actually kind of wicks in. It gets sucked into the wall and maintains for quite some time. We do see evidence again of a mother goddess figure. So this is something that's going to transcend almost all cultures. We've seen this figure so far in Egypt. We've seen it in the Middle East. We've seen it certainly in India. Okay, and now we're going to see it here with the Minoans. We do see a lot of symbolism of the bull that tracks with the original story. Okay, sort of similar to when we see the Indus people disappear, these guys are going to kind of just disappear. And we're not really sure 100% why that was. By 1400, they're just gone. Some people surmise it's a volcanic eruption. We do have evidence this is actually a giant mound of volcanic ash that's located on Crete that's being studied. Some people say it was other type of tectonic activity, perhaps an earthquake. But again, with the rise of another group, similar in time to when they disappeared, the Mycenaeans, most people think they at least had a hand in it. The Mycenaeans are going to be familiar with, for those of you who've seen the movie Troy. They're going to be the group that Brad Pitt was with. Okay, so the Minoan people are going to just kind of, they're just going to kind of disappear, and we're not 100% sure exactly what all the ramifications or reasons for that were. But we do know Mycenaeans came to power soon afterwards. Keep in mind the Minoans weren't really a warrior people, they were a trader people. So the Mycenaeans are going to come after that. Here's some examples of some of the excavated jewelry that we know the Mycenaeans traded, and they held up the Greek tradition of being well-established sea traders. Again, if you look at them geographically, they're located approximately here. Some people have this located a little farther to the south. They certainly had sea access, as most Greek city-states did. Most of them were on the water. One major exception is Sparta, that's going to be located here. We're going to talk about them later. All right, and the Mycenaeans are going to participate in something called the Trojan War. So they're going to basically have the 2 centuries from the 1400 to the 1200 BC. They're going to trade widely across the Mediterranean. They're going to adapt writing from the Minoans, so they will have writing capability, and they're going to settle in city-states, and they're going to use warrior kings. In other words, people who were impressive in battle would be the ones who would lead, not necessarily somebody who had a hereditary right, although that would play a role. The Trojan War, it's an important war that happened around 1250. It wasn't really even uncovered until the late 19th century, when a guy by the name of Heinrich Schliemann, a German historian and archaeologist, actually took Homer's epic, the Iliad, and was able to locate the original city. For a long time, people really thought that Troy was not a real place, and that it was just a place that was made up by Homer and other Greek storytellers. But in fact, Schliemann was able to uncover it, and it was actually uncovered many levels of the same city that had been rebuilt and rebuilt on the same spot. So most of you have heard the story of the legend of Paris and Helen being kidnapped, and this big war that occurred, this big fight. What's more likely is that, according to historians, we have the economic rivalry between Mycenae and Troy. Now, why was that? If we take a look at it geographically, the Mycenaeans wanted control of the Mediterranean Sea. They're located and they're established traders. When we get to see Troy, Troy is located right here. So you've got Mycenae located here, Troy is here. This area right here is known as a strait. It's a very important strait called the Bosphorus. This area right here, this strait, which Troy controls because it's right on top of it, it's also why one of the reasons their city's there, is it controls the trade between this body of water, which gets much bigger and expands, called the Black Sea, and the entirety of the Mediterranean. Well, all up in the Black Sea, you've got all these little colonies and all these other little city-states that all want to trade with everybody out here. So if you control this spot, you really control a lot of money. You can tax them. So that's the economic rivalry is probably more likely what caused the fight to happen. All right, Troy will eventually be defeated and burned, and the Mycenaeans will claim victory. There's going to be a series of invaders that are going to knock the Mycenaeans out of place to really bring in the age of Homer. One came by the sea, and we really don't know who they were, but there was another land-based group called the Dorians. These Dorians came through, and they really put the hurting on the Mycenaeans, and they really kind of pushed Greece in almost a mini Dark Age between 11 and 800. What's interesting about the Dorians is they are actually going to be the ones who are the ancestors of another group we're going to be talking about, and you're familiar with, which is the Spartans. So there's some connection here between the powerful land warriors, Dorians, which are going to move beyond Mycenae to the south and set up Sparta. So Homer's going to write 2 main stories here, the Iliad and the Odyssey. The Iliad is really the story of the Trojan War, and you have Achilles versus Hector, and hopefully many of you have read this story. It's a very epic tale involving sacrifice and honor, and it is a great story that we just don't really have enough time to look into in great detail. The Odyssey, it happens afterwards, and the Odyssey is actually the story of one of the soldiers in the Trojan War, Odysseus, and he wants to return. Troy is now gone, so all he wants to do is get home to his wife and his family. And through a series of unfortunate events and a series of poor choices, he is instead destined to wander around the Mediterranean on episodic adventures, and they're all very interesting. This is a picture here that I've provided of one of his adventures. Was really him versus the Sirens, and you can see these, they're female-headed birds, sometimes referred to as harpies. They have a very sweet melodic voice that if you hear their voice, you would crash your ship upon the rocks.